There are growing fears the Chinese government may use the military to crack down on protesters in Hong Kong. Flights have resumed at the city's airport after violence and chaos erupted yesterday.
Protesters and police clashed. There were injuries. There were arrests. Beijing has described the pro-democracy protests as, quote, conduct close to terrorism. For more on this, let's bring in CBSN contributor and senior fellow at the Asia Society, Isaac Stone-Fish. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Remind our viewers, Isaac, why these protests started. You and I were covering this yesterday when we were watching the video come into CBSN, and I listed a series of demands that the protesters had, and you sort of indicated that, yes, we started with what is probably the most likely scenario, and giving in from Beijing to not going to happen at all.
Right. So these started several months ago when people in Hong Kong were upset about a bill that would allow Hong Kong to extradite suspects to mainland China. And there is a lot of pride in Hong Kong about its relatively independent judicial system, and a lot of worry about Beijing's not so independent judicial system. And things snowballed from there. And really, since the handover in 1997, Beijing and Hong Kong have been in this uneasy dance about how free Hong Kong could be. And where we are today is just a reflection of these things not being settled.
I think when we see this stuff that we're watching right here, we can't help but to think about Tiananmen Square and the massacre there. And it has sort of occurred to me that, and maybe the protests will continue to evolve, but it started out with sort of hundreds of thousands of people taking to the streets peacefully. And what we're seeing here it's a smaller group of people, but very intense. The violence is being ratcheted up. I presume the Chinese government is painfully aware of the lasting impact and impression that the Tiananmen Square massacre had. Yeah. They don't want another one, right? Or maybe they want to tamp down on the protests more.
I think we can very hopefully say that the Chinese Communist Party does not want another massacre, and they don't want to be the international pariahs that they were in the early 90s following the massacre. There's some very big differences between the situations. Beijing was far more isolated, even in '89 before the protests. It was far poorer. It's flat around Tiananmen Square. It's just this massive area. Hong Kong is incredibly hilly, and if, unfortunately, Beijing does see the need to send in troops, either from the PLA garrison in Hong Kong or paramilitary police from around the region, it's probably going to be a lot more of an urban warfare type situation, which is something that I wish we could say that no one wants, but we don't really have good insight into what the top leadership thinks about this particular issue.
Right. Well, here's what the top leadership in this country thinks. The president tweeted, "Our intelligence has informed us that the Chinese government is moving troops to the border with Hong Kong. Everyone should be calm and safe." Reminds me of that Animal House scene. Remain calm, all is well. But if you're in Hong Kong and you're protesting for something that you believe in, the United States historically has supported pro-democracy protests around the world. We don't have a great track record in all instances, but presidents throughout the course of modern American history have tried to be on the right side of that history, whether it's President Kennedy presenting himself at the Berlin Wall and saying, "Ich bin ein Berliner," whether it's Ronald Reagan saying, right with Premier Gorbachev sitting at his side, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall," Jimmy Carter boycotting the Olympics. Presidents historically have taken a stand when they see pro-democracy movements happening like this. There have been some failures. President Obama, specifically when it came to the Green Revolution in Iran, was criticized for not taking a stronger stand. Should the President of the United States be warning Xi Jinping in the same way that he warns Xi Jinping about trade to not engage the protesters in Hong Kong with the military, with the Chinese military?
I think a lot of people would like to see that, and I would like to see stronger statements too. I think, unfortunately, and maybe you could say this about Soviet Union in the 80s, but it really does not seem that Hong Kong will be democratic, and it certainly does not seem that Hong Kong will be independent. It really feels hard to imagine a scenario where Hong Kong people are voting and choosing their own chief executive. So perhaps this is Trump cannily playing the situation. Perhaps this is just more of him tweeting off the cuff, but it doesn't feel like in the next 5 or 10 years, we're going to see a Hong Kong that is what it wants to be.
All right, Isaac Stone-Fish, thank you so much.
Thank you.